The words hit me like a knife. Maybe it's time you sold the house and moved away, old man. I stood just outside the doorway, hidden in the shadow of my own home, listening as the man who married my daughter spoke those words without a shred of hesitation. My hands went cold, my heart heavier than I'd ever felt before. That house wasn't just wood and nails, it was the life I built with my late wife. Every laugh, every tear, every memory woven into its walls. To him, it was just property. To me, it was everything. That was the moment I realized betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes from those you once called family. And from that moment on, I knew. He might have underestimated an old man, but he had just started a war he couldn't win. Before we dive into today's story, I recommend you hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. If you enjoy this video, type 1 in the comments. If not, type 0 to let me know how I can make better content for you. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. Morning in Savannah always carried a kind of hush, as if the whole town was holding its breath before the first church bell. I woke before dawn, as I always did, the faint scent of salt water drifting in through the open window. The St. James bell tower rang 6 times, echoing across the marsh like a voice from another century. I brewed coffee in the old percolator Linda and I bought our first year of marriage. Its sputter and hiss filled the kitchen, blending with the song of cicadas and the groan of the ceiling fan turning above me. The house was quiet, too quiet sometimes. 3 years since Linda passed, and I still caught myself expecting her to step in from the porch with flour on her apron and a half smile that forgave everything. Our house stood on the edge of a narrow street lined with magnolias. Red brick, tall windows, a porch swing I built myself. The boards creaked the same way they did 40 years ago when I carried Linda across that threshold. Every mark on the doorframe told a story, the pencil lines that measured Grace's height, the faint burn from the Thanksgiving candle that tipped too close to the wall. People saw an old building. I saw a diary written in wood. I spent most mornings in the small workshop behind the kitchen, sanding cabinet doors or patching rocking chairs for neighbors. Retirement never suited me, so I found ways to keep my hands busy. There's peace in the rhythm of a saw, in the smell of fresh cedar curling from a plane. Work had always been my way of saying prayers. I guess that's why the townsfolk kept bringing me their broken things, to watch me piece them back together as if it could be done to people too. Grace stopped by nearly every evening after her shift at the library. She carried books under her arm the way some women carried purses. "You'll like this one, Dad," she'd say, setting a stack beside my chair. She was 28 now, still shy in a room of strangers, still soft around the edges like her mother. When Ryan entered her life, I wanted to believe he'd see that gentleness and protect it. That's what fathers want, for someone to stand beside their daughters when we no longer can. Ryan was the kind of man who shook hands with both confidence and calculation. Slick shoes, silver watch, and talk that moved too fast for my liking. He spoke about renovations, flipping margins, equity potential. I nodded when he spoke, but inside I wondered if he'd ever held a hammer long enough to know how wood bends before it breaks. He told me once my porch could use an open concept. Modern buyers love that. I smiled politely, though it felt like he'd suggested knocking a wall out of my chest. Still, I wanted to trust him. Grace seemed happy, and that meant more to me than any suspicion that crawled under my skin. They married in spring beneath the oak at the churchyard, the same tree Linda and I stood under decades ago. After the ceremony, Ryan thanked me for letting them stay a few weeks at my place while they sorted out their finances. I told him the house had room, though I didn't mention that my heart didn't. Megan, Grace's oldest friend, stopped by often. She was the sort of woman who laughed easily, cooked enough for everyone, and made even silence feel comfortable. She brought casseroles and tidied the kitchen when I wasn't looking. I thought she was good for Grace, a reminder that kindness still existed without an agenda. Evening settled heavy in Savannah. The sun bled into the marsh until the whole horizon burned orange. I'd sit on the porch swing, nursing a cup of coffee gone cold, watching light fade from the cypress trees. Sometimes Ryan joined me, phone in hand, voice buzzing with numbers and deals. I tried to listen, but his words fell like sawdust, fine, meaningless, and easy to blow away. "You could make a fortune selling this place," he once said, eyes scanning the porch posts. "Old Southern charm like this is a gold mine." I chuckled, not because it was funny, but because silence might have been worse. Later, when Grace kissed my cheek goodnight and the house fell still again, I walked through each room like a caretaker locking up a museum. My fingers brushed the dented banister, the wallpaper Linda chose, the frame of her photograph beside the bed. There was a peace in that ritual, but also an unease I couldn't name. Ryan's words echoed faintly, mixing with the creak of the floorboards. I stood at the back door, looking out across the yard. Spanish moss swayed over the fence, the air damp and thick with the smell of earth and wood. Everything looked calm, the kind of calm that comes before a storm gathers beyond the trees. I closed the door gently, telling myself the same thing I told Linda's photo each night. Everything's fine. But even as I said it, I knew the house was listening, waiting for what came next. If you've ever trusted someone only to find out they were quietly planning your downfall, stay with me, because what happens next will make your heart stop. The night after the wedding still smelled of flowers and champagne. Bits of ribbon lay on the porch rail where Grace had tied them that morning. The dining table was crowded with cards, leftover slices of cake, and a vase of roses already beginning to wilt. I moved through the house quietly, collecting glasses and folding napkins, the way Linda used to after every family gathering. The air felt heavy, sweet with the memory of celebration, but my body ached from smiling too long. Grace and Ryan had decided to stay here for a while, just until the market cools, Ryan said, like he was talking about weather instead of a home. I told him it was fine. Truth was, I didn't mind company. Nights had grown long since Linda passed, and the sound of voices, even borrowed ones, softened the silence. After midnight, when the lights were low and the house had settled into that slow southern quiet, I went out back to check the water pump. It was an old habit. The pump wheezed like an asthmatic old dog, and I liked to make sure it hadn't lost its prime. The moon was bright enough to see the dew collecting on the grass. I heard footsteps on the gravel path and froze. Ryan's voice came first, low, confident, carrying that same salesman's polish he wore at the wedding. "Tell her to sell the house and move him somewhere decent," he said, the words slicing through the warm air. "Some senior facility, out by the coast maybe, the sooner the better." For a second I thought I'd misheard. Then he laughed softly, a dry, calculating sound. "That place is worth at least 1.1 once it's opened up. Easy flip." My heart slammed once, then held still. I pressed my palm against the pump's metal casing. It was cold enough to sting. Ryan's voice kept drifting toward me, bits and pieces of a plan that sounded rehearsed. "Grace trusts me. Once she convinces him, we'll get it listed fast. It's just business." The world around me blurred, the hum of crickets, the smell of wet earth, even the shimmer of moonlight on the pond. It all seemed to fade until only his voice remained. I could have stepped out, demanded an explanation, shouted like the fool he must think I am, but something older and colder told me to stay quiet. You learn more by listening than by shouting. When the conversation ended, Ryan's phone light flared briefly as he walked back inside. I stayed where I was, breathing through my teeth. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the kind of rage that comes when someone mistakes your kindness for weakness. I stood there a long time before going in. The kitchen light was still on. Grace was sitting at the table, folding napkins into perfect squares. She looked up, smiled. "Dad, are you okay? You look pale." "Just allergies acting up," I muttered. She laughed, said something about the magnolias blooming early, and went back to her napkins. I wanted to reach across that table, to tell her what I'd heard, to ask how well she really knew the man she'd married, but the words wouldn't come. I'd seen the way she looked at him, like a child watching fireworks. How do you tell your child the light she loves is just fire eating through the dark? Later, in my room, I unlocked the cedar box Linda had kept under our bed. Inside lay her handwritten will, the paper yellowed at the edges. My thumb brushed her signature, slanted, deliberate, fading in places. Right of lifetime residency, the words read, underlined twice. She'd always been the cautious one. I smiled without humor. You were right, Linda, I whispered. I locked the box again, slid it beneath the bed, and sat in the dark. The house creaked, settling into sleep, unaware of the poison blooming in its walls. I could hear Ryan's footsteps upstairs, heavy and sure. I wrote in my notebook the same way I'd write a grocery list. They want the house. Then, after a pause, another line. They'll have to walk through Linda to get it. Outside, a wind picked up, brushing the magnolia leaves against the siding. I watched the curtains move with the breeze, slow and steady, like the house was breathing beside me. Everything looked calm, the kind of calm you see before thunder finds its voice. If you think the worst part is hearing the betrayal, wait until you see how deep the manipulation truly runs. Don't blink, you'll want to catch every second. The next morning broke warm and gold, sunlight spilling through the kitchen blinds like thin ribbons. Grace was already humming as she poured coffee, wearing Ryan's oversized shirt that still smelled of cologne. Ryan sat at the table, scrolling on his phone, the faint glow lighting the sharp edges of his face. From my chair, I watched them the way a farmer studies clouds, trying to guess when the weather would turn. "Morning, Dad," Grace said cheerfully. "I made you an extra cup." "Thanks, sweetheart." I forced a smile. My hand trembled slightly when I lifted the mug. Her kindness stung more than comforted. Ryan looked up, that salesman's grin stretched across his face. "Mr. Thompson, I've been thinking," he said casually. "We could make life easier for everyone. Maybe fix this place up a bit, turn it into something more modern." He said modern like it was holy scripture. Grace leaned in, her eyes glowing with excitement. "Ryan's got all these ideas, Dad. He says open layouts raise property value." I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "This house has stood just fine for 70 years. Ryan chuckled softly, pretending respect. "Of course, sir. I just mean, it's worth a lot more than you think. You could live anywhere. Enjoy retirement near the coast. There's a place called Sunset Haven. Beautiful ocean breeze, no maintenance, full service. I checked it out online, I didn't answer." Grace squeezed his arm, smiling as if he'd just offered a gift. I saw what he was doing, planting ideas in her mind like seeds under soft soil. She didn't even notice. She just wanted peace. "I'll think about it," I said, and stood up before the bitterness could spill from my voice. All day I busied myself in the workshop. The smell of sawdust helped me think. Every hammer strike echoed that same thought. He wants the house. By evening, I'd calmed enough to rejoin them for dinner. Ryan came in holding a brown folder, neat and crisp. "Got some quick paperwork," he said lightly. "Just a guarantee for my business loan. Routine stuff. Grace, could you sign these as my secondary contact?" She wiped her hands on a towel and smiled. "Sure, honey." I froze. Something in the way he said guarantee made my chest tighten. Grace sat at the counter, pen in hand, flipping pages she didn't read. The papers rustled like dry leaves. "What's it for again?" she asked. "Just a short-term deal, babe," he said. "Keeps things moving for the company." I stood in the doorway, pretending to check the thermostat. My eyes caught a logo stamped at the top. Savannah Property Holdings. Not a bank, not even close. "Everything okay, Dad?" Grace asked. "Just checking the temperature," I muttered. My throat was dry. Ryan gathered the papers once she'd finished and tucked them neatly into his briefcase. "Appreciate it," he said smoothly. "This will help everyone." He kissed her forehead, winked at me, and left whistling. The sound of the front door closing echoed like a gavel. Grace turned to me. "He's working so hard, Dad. I know you're not used to his world, but he really is trying." I nodded, unwilling to wound her with the truth. "If you say so, sweetheart." When she went upstairs, I opened my notebook again, the same one where I had written my thoughts the night before. Under "They want the house," I added a new line. "He's making her sign for it." Anger flickered like static under my skin. I walked to the study, opened the old filing cabinet, and pulled out the deed to the house. The paper smelled of dust and time, the ink faded but firm. Thomas and Linda Thompson, joint ownership. I traced Linda's name with my finger. Still there, still binding. A small relief, but it wasn't enough. That night, I sat in the workshop, the air thick with sawdust and silence. The lamp threw a weak cone of light over the workbench. I opened a fresh page and began to write. Step 1, find proof. Step 2, wait for him to think he's winning. The pen dug deep into the paper, leaving grooves like scars. I closed the notebook and leaned back in my chair, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, and the distant sound of Ryan's car engine fading into the night. He thought I was old. He thought I was harmless. Let him. If you're still watching and your gut is twisting already, just know, the real storm hasn't even begun yet. Keep your eyes on the screen. Rain had been falling since dawn, a slow, steady drizzle that softened the edges of everything outside. The roof hummed with it, the gutters whispered, and I sat at the kitchen table staring at my notebook. The words, find proof, looked smaller today, like they were sinking into the paper. I poured myself a cup of coffee, but it tasted like rust. I couldn't stop replaying Ryan's voice in my mind, the smooth tone, the confidence of a man who thought the world was already his. By mid-morning, I grabbed my coat and drove into town. The streets of Savannah were slick and shining, reflections of street lamps dancing in puddles. At the local bank, I asked to speak to a loan officer, pretending I was looking for information about property transfer options. The young man behind the counter smiled politely and searched the system when I mentioned Savannah Property Holdings. His brow furrowed. That's not a bank, he said. They're a real estate firm. Small outfit, kind of aggressive. Heard they handle risky deals for clients who can't qualify for standard financing. Risky deals. The phrase sat heavy in my chest. I thanked him and walked out into the drizzle, the smell of wet asphalt rising around me. Ryan hadn't just tricked Grace into signing a form. He was setting a trap. Back home, I waited until Grace left for the grocery store. The second the car disappeared down the street, I went into the living room and opened the drawer where Ryan kept his papers. My fingers shook as I flipped through folders. One of them bore the same logo I'd seen before, Savannah Property Holdings. Inside were contracts, all stamped and dated. I took photos of every page with my old flip phone, the camera clicking softly in the silence. Halfway through, guilt hit me hard. I was snooping in my daughter's home. But another voice, Linda's voice, cut through the doubt. You're not stealing, Tom. You're protecting. The front door opened just as I shut the drawer. Grace's footsteps echoed on the hardwood. I slipped the phone into my pocket and turned toward her. Dad, you okay? Just fixing that drawer hinge, I said quickly. She smiled, unaware. Ryan says we might refinance the place next month. He wants to make sure you're comfortable wherever you choose to live. I looked at her, at the innocent trust in her eyes. Sweetheart, always read before you sign anything, all right? She laughed softly. Dad, Ryan's careful. He'd never risk something shady. Her words landed like stones in water, small ripples, but deep ones. I said nothing more. That evening, as the rain picked up, I got a phone call from an unknown number. For a moment, I thought it might be the lawyer from Charleston I'd been meaning to contact. Instead, a woman's voice came through, hushed and nervous. Mr. Thompson? My name's Maggie. I used to work for Ryan. My pulse quickened. Go on. I shouldn't even be calling, but I thought you should know. He's been in trouble before. Atlanta, 2 years ago. Fraud investigations. He hides assets under different names. Savannah Property Holdings is one of them. Her voice trembled. Please, don't tell anyone I called. I'm sending you something that proves it. The line went dead before I could respond. 2 days later, a small padded envelope arrived at the post office. Inside was a USB drive and a note written in shaky pen. For your eyes only. I plugged it into my old laptop in the workshop. Files appeared, emails between Ryan and someone named D. Weller. One line burned itself into my mind. Once the Thompson property is secured, the loan clears. Liquidate fast. I leaned back, the wooden chair creaking beneath me. Rain thudded harder on the roof, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to purpose. I wasn't crazy. Ryan was playing a dangerous game, and now I had proof. Still, fear crept in behind the relief. Grace didn't believe me. The law might take months, and men like Ryan didn't wait that long. That night, I sat alone in the workshop, the only light a dim bulb swinging slightly from the ceiling. The scent of cedar mixed with rain. I opened my laptop again and typed a short email to an old friend in Charleston, my late wife's lawyer. Need quiet advice. Someone is after the house. I attached the photos I'd taken and clicked send. Lightning flashed outside, casting my shadow across the wall. For a moment, I saw myself as I really was, an old man standing guard over ghosts and wood and memories. But I wasn't backing down, not yet. If you thought one secret could destroy everything, imagine what happens when the lies start collapsing on their own. The rain had stopped, but the sky still hung heavy and gray, pressing low over Savannah. For 3 days, I'd heard nothing back from Charleston. I spent those days in silence, fixing things that didn't need fixing. The door hinge, the porch rail, the same old clock that hadn't ticked right since 1994. When the email finally arrived, I opened it with hands that already knew the truth. Tom, it began, Savannah Property Holdings has ties to an active real estate fraud case in Atlanta. Be careful. If Grace's signature is on those forms, the property could already be collateral. Move quietly. The words blurred for a moment. I leaned back in the chair, the air suddenly too thin to breathe. Collateral. That meant the house, Linda's house, was already being used as leverage in Ryan's game. That evening, I caught him pacing on the phone outside the porch. He spoke softly but sharply, a predator's tone dressed up in business talk. I couldn't make out every word, but I caught enough. Transfer, loan finalized, closing date. His back was to the window, his silhouette sharp against the fading light. I watched until Grace came out and wrapped her arms around him, and he changed his voice instantly. Warm, casual, loving. It was like watching a snake shed its skin. The next day, I noticed small things that confirmed my fears. His briefcase stayed locked now, his laptop password changed, and the polite distance he used to keep turned into quiet hostility. He'd glance at me like a man inspecting a crack in a wall he planned to tear down. That night, while I was in the workshop, he came in unannounced. The door creaked open, and his cologne filled the air before his voice did. "You've been busy, Mr. Thompson." I didn't look up from the workbench. I like keeping my hands occupied. He leaned against the doorframe, smiling faintly. "I hope your curiosity isn't getting the best of you." Sometimes old men dig in the wrong places and end up buried in their own mess. My hand froze over the chisel. "If there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to fear," I said quietly. His eyes flickered, that grin still in place. "Fair enough." He turned to leave but paused. "Grace doesn't need the stress of family drama. Let's keep things peaceful, shall we?" He walked out without waiting for a response. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it echo in my ears. Later that evening, I found Grace in the kitchen, slicing lemons for tea. I took a deep breath. "Sweetheart, you ever wonder where Ryan's getting all this money for his ventures?" She looked up, puzzled. "Dad, please, not again." "I'm just saying, make sure you know what you're signing, all right?" Her knife stopped midair. "Ryan told me you've been looking into his work, that you don't trust him. Is that true?" I hesitated, and that was enough. Her voice grew sharper. "Why can't you just be happy for us? You're always suspicious. He's trying to help you, Dad." I saw the same defensiveness in her eyes that Linda used to warn me about. "Grace, no," she snapped, cutting me off. "You're not being fair." Before I could answer, Ryan walked in, putting his hand gently on her shoulder, like a man comforting a child. "It's okay, honey. Your dad's just worried." He looked at me over her head, and I saw the smirk he tried to hide. Grace turned away, shaking her head, tears glinting. "I can't do this right now," she whispered, and left the room. I stood there, the air thick with something unspoken. Ryan gave a small shrug. "You really should mind your boundaries. Then he followed her upstairs. When I returned to the workshop later that night, the lamp was still burning. My laptop was open. The drawer where I kept the USB was slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I checked the files, empty. Every document, every photo, gone. The USB itself was missing. The realization hit like a gut punch. He knew. He'd been here. I sank into the chair, gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. For a long moment, all I could hear was the rain gutter dripping outside. Then I closed my eyes and whispered, "You erased my proof. Now I'll erase your mask." The clock on the wall ticked once, sharp, final. Somewhere upstairs, laughter echoed faintly, but to me, it sounded like thunder. The silence in the house had grown thick enough to feel. Grace no longer greeted me in the mornings, and when she passed me in the hallway, her eyes slid away as if contact might burn. Ryan played the perfect husband, bringing her flowers, cooking dinner, opening doors like some movie gentleman. Every performance was meant for me, and every smile was a warning. For the first time in years, I felt like a stranger in my own home. My chair at the table sat empty during meals. My tools stayed untouched in the workshop. The house creaked and sighed at night, but the only sound that truly hurt was Grace's laughter when Ryan whispered something to her. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered the hallway and stopped in front of the old wedding photo of Linda and me. She was wearing her favorite cream dress, her eyes bright with quiet fire. I remembered her voice as clearly as if she were beside me. Justice doesn't always shout. It waits for the right silence. I whispered into the empty room, "You were right, Linda. It's time." That was the night I decided I wouldn't fight Ryan's way, with noise and anger, but mine, with patience, precision, and proof. The next morning, I reviewed the property deed again. My name and Linda's were still on it, unchanged since 1987. That meant Ryan could only touch this house through forgery or manipulation. He needed me, or Grace, to sign it away. That was his weakness. I spent the morning at my desk, sketching out a rough plan. I would offer him what he wanted most, the illusion of victory. If he thought I'd given up, he'd drop his guard. But first, I needed a little insurance. I called Maggie, the same woman who had sent me the USB. Her voice trembled when she answered. "Mr. Thompson, I was scared you'd call back. He's dangerous." "I know," I said, "but I need your help one last time." She hesitated. "What can I do? You told me Ryan records his calls, right? To protect himself?" "Yes, he keeps everything on his phone. I've seen him replay them." "Good," I said slowly. "Then I'll make him say exactly what I need him to." That evening, I found him on the porch smoking a cigar, pretending to admire the sunset. I forced a tired smile and joined him. "You were right," I said, voice low, almost weary. "Maybe it's time to sell." "I'm tired of keeping up this old place," he turned, eyes sharp with disbelief before smoothing into false sympathy. "You sure, Mr. Thompson?" "I don't want to pressure you." I chuckled. "Son, I'm old, not blind. You've got ambition. I respect that. Maybe you can help me handle the paperwork." His grin widened like a curtain being drawn back to reveal the villain behind it. "Of course. I can handle the whole thing. I'll make sure Grace's part is covered too." "Appreciate it," I said. "You've got a good head for business." He nodded, flicking ash off the porch rail, unaware of the tiny recorder I'd hidden earlier inside the carved wooden frame above us. Over the next half hour, he talked too freely about potential buyers, about adjusting the documents to speed the process. Then came the line that sealed his fate. Grace already signed what I needed. Her signature just needs to be aligned. That was his word for forged. I kept my expression calm, almost bored, while inside my pulse hammered like a drum. He didn't notice. His ego was too loud. When he finally excused himself to take a call, I sat alone on the porch, the tape still rolling in the background. The night air smelled of pine and smoke. For the first time in weeks, I breathed without fear. Later, I returned to my room and checked the recorder. The red light blinked steady. The audio was clear. I had him. I called my friend in Charleston right away. "I've got him on tape," I said quietly. He admitted it himself. "It's time to make things right." There was a pause on the other end before the calm voice replied, "Then let's do it by the book. Don't confront him again. Let me handle the rest." When I hung up, I looked out through the window. The moonlight poured across the porch where Ryan had been standing, bright and silver like judgment itself. "Linda," I whispered, "we're almost there. If you're still here, wondering how far justice can go before it breaks a heart, don't look away. This is where everything turns." Morning came quiet and pale, the kind of stillness that feels unnatural. Ryan was in the kitchen making coffee, his movements sharp and mechanical. Grace sat by the window pretending to read the newspaper, but her eyes hadn't moved from the same paragraph for 10 minutes. I sat on the porch, rocking gently, watching light filter through the magnolias. On the surface, everything looked normal. Beneath it, the air crackled. My phone buzzed. It was an email from Charleston. Evidence submitted to the Georgia Financial Crimes Bureau. Remain silent. Do not engage. I read it twice, then deleted it. A strange calm settled over me. The wheels were already turning, and there was no stopping them now. Inside, Ryan's voice carried low and sharp on the phone. "No, I didn't file anything." "What?" "Who?" He cut himself off when he saw me watching through the screen door. His expression smoothed instantly. "Morning, Mr. Thompson," he said lightly, but his jaw was tight enough to crack stone. I nodded, pretending not to notice. "Coffee smells strong today?" He gave a humorless chuckle. "Helps me think." That evening at dinner, the tension finally surfaced. Ryan poured himself a drink and leaned back in his chair. "Funny thing about trust," he said, eyes locked on me. "Once you lose it, there's no getting it back." I cut a piece of roast slowly, savoring the pause. Good thing truth doesn't need trust to survive. The silverware clinked. Grace looked between us, her brow creased. "What's going on with you two?" Ryan smiled first. "Nothing, sweetheart. Your father's just tired. Getting older makes men suspicious." "Ryan," she started, but he reached over and brushed her hand gently. The gesture looked tender, but felt like ownership. Later that night, I could hear them arguing softly upstairs. Grace's voice cracked. His grew darker, meaner. When the house finally went quiet again, I lay awake until morning. 2 days later, Grace began noticing what I'd seen for months. Ryan's calls became secretive. He checked his phone constantly, sometimes stepping outside in the rain just to answer. The warmth she once saw in him had drained away, leaving a man made of nerves and calculation. Then came the moment everything broke. It was late afternoon. Grace was folding laundry in the bedroom when Ryan's phone buzzed on the dresser. He was in the shower. The screen lit up with a message preview. "We're done covering for you. If he talks, it's over." She froze. For the first time, she didn't look away. She unlocked the phone, his password was her birthday, and scrolled through recent voice memos. The top file was labeled Thompson Deal, Final. Her hand trembled as she pressed play. Ryan's voice came through, smug and clear. "Grace already signed what I needed. Her signature just needs to be aligned." She stopped breathing. In the background of the recording, she heard my voice, calm, resigned, the same night on the porch. When I found her an hour later, she was sitting on the floor of the hallway, holding the phone to her chest. Her eyes were red. "Dad," she whispered, "you were right." I knelt beside her, unsure whether to be relieved or heartbroken. "It's over now, honey. Just let it unfold." But the unfolding came fast. That evening, Ryan stormed through the front door, wet from the rain, eyes blazing. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "You have no idea what you've done." Grace stood behind me, trembling. "Ryan, stop." He pointed at me, shaking. "He ruined everything. You just destroyed your own life because of him." I didn't move. "You did that yourself." For a moment, the house held its breath. Then headlights flashed through the window, blue and red, pulsing against the walls. Ryan turned, confusion flickering across his face. "What the hell?" The knock came hard and fast. 2 officers stepped in, their badges catching the light. "Ryan Keller?" one asked. "You're under arrest for property fraud and falsification of documents." Grace covered her mouth as they read him his rights. He didn't fight, just stared at me with cold, burning hatred as the cuffs clicked shut. When they let him out, the night air swallowed the sound of his shoes scraping against the porch steps. Grace stayed in the doorway, tears streaking her face. I put a hand on her shoulder, but she shook her head. "I thought I loved him," she whispered. "I know," I said softly. "That's what makes it hurt." The police car pulled away, lights flashing against the magnolias. The house went quiet again. Inside, I placed the photo of Linda back on the mantle and whispered, "It's over, darling." But it doesn't feel like winning. The week after Ryan's arrest moved slow, like the world was relearning how to breathe. The mornings came gray and quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ribs. I walked the hallways of the house, touching the walls Linda once painted herself, noticing every small sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, the hollow echo of a space finally emptied of lies. Grace barely spoke. She moved through the house like a ghost, her hair unbrushed, eyes swollen from crying. Some nights, I'd wake to the faint sound of her door opening, footsteps crossing the kitchen, then the tap of the faucet. I never went to her. I knew there are wounds that need silence before words can reach them. The coffee pot stayed half full every morning. Ryan's mug, the black one with the gold rim, still sat in the sink. I stared at it for 3 days before finally washing it and setting it aside. I didn't throw it out. Grace's grief didn't need to be rushed. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the magnolias, I started fixing the fence out back. The boards had warped over the years, but the work steadied me. Each nail, each hammer strike, was a heartbeat returning to rhythm. Later, I cleaned the workshop, swept the dust, oiled the hinges, and brewed coffee just the way Linda used to like it. Strong, a little bitter. The world, it seemed, was asking to keep going. Grace came downstairs late that evening, wrapped in one of her old college sweaters. She looked smaller somehow, but her voice had steadied. "I can't stop thinking about it," she said. "How I defended him. How I made you feel alone." I set down the mug. "You were in love," I said quietly. "Love makes fools out of all of us. The trick is what we do once the fog clears." Her eyes filled again. "I thought love meant believing no matter what." "Sometimes love means seeing what hurts and staying anyway," I told her. "You did the best you could with what you knew." We sat in silence for a long time. The clock ticked softly behind us, and for the first time in months, the house didn't feel hostile, just tired. 2 days later, Grace came to me with a decision. "I called the investigators," she said. "I told them everything. How Ryan used my name, the papers I signed. I gave them his messages and recordings from his phone." I looked up sharply. "How did you get those?" Her mouth trembled into the smallest smile. "He kept everything. I guess he thought he'd need it someday, to protect himself. Turns out it'll protect everyone else." That was the moment I saw it, something new in her eyes. Not just regret, but resolve. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was part of the fight. The next morning, I got a call from my friend in Charleston. His voice carried a warmth I hadn't heard in weeks. "Tom, it's done. The property's cleared, the case is solid. You're safe." For a second, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. "Thank you," I managed. "You can finally rest, old friend," he said. I chuckled softly. Rest isn't in my nature, but peace, maybe. After I hung up, I walked to the lake behind the house, where Linda used to sit with her fishing rod and hum old country tunes. The water shimmered under the afternoon sun. I laid a small bouquet of white lilies on the surface. They drifted out, spinning slowly. "It's done, Linda," I whispered. "She's safe. You'd be proud." The air was still, but I could have sworn I heard the faintest sigh through the trees, a kind of approval. When I turned back toward the house, Grace was standing on the porch. The porch light glowed soft behind her, outlining her like memory come to life. "Coffee's ready, Dad," she called. I smiled, walking toward her. the earth damp and forgiving under my boots. That's the best news I've heard in months. We sat together on the porch, two silhouettes against the fading sun. The world around us was quiet, and for once, that quiet didn't feel heavy. It felt like peace, the kind Linda had promised would come when the storm was finally done. If you have come this far, you deserve to see what redemption really looks like, because peace sometimes arrives when you least expect it. A month later, spring settled over Savannah like a promise. The air softened, carrying the scent of wet soil and blooming azaleas. The storms had passed, and for the first time in years, the house on Chestnut Hill felt like a home again. The porch had been repainted, the fences repaired, and the flower beds Linda once tended were alive with color. I stood by the gate one morning, coffee steaming in my hands, and watched the sunlight spill through the magnolia branches. The world looked new, as if time itself had decided to forgive us. Grace had changed too. She no longer walked with her shoulders slumped or her eyes fixed on the ground. She'd started working part-time at the local library, sorting through old archives and helping kids find books. Every evening, she'd come home with the faint smell of paper and dust, clinging to her clothes and stories about the people she met. Sometimes she'd stop at the farmer's market on the way back, bringing home bread or flowers for the table. There was life in her again, a quiet, steady kind that didn't need anyone else's approval. Watching her rebuild herself piece by piece made me realize just how strong she'd become. One morning, as I poured my second cup of coffee, the headline of the Savannah Post caught my eye. Local man sentenced for financial fraud. There was Ryan's face, pale, tired, stripped of the arrogance that used to cling to him like cologne. The article said he had been sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. I read it once, folded the paper neatly, and placed it in the trash. I didn't feel triumph, just a small, hollow ache. Justice had come, but it came cold, like rain on a gravestone. That afternoon, I decided to finish cleaning out the last of the old boxes from the attic. I found years of forgotten things. Tax records, blueprints of the house, Linda's handwritten recipes. I even found Grace's crayon drawings from kindergarten, smiling suns and crooked trees. I spent hours sorting, keeping what mattered, burning what didn't. By evening, the house felt lighter, like it could finally breathe again. As I sat on the porch, the light slanting gold across the fields, I heard Linda's voice in my mind as clear as the day she left. "You didn't win, Tom. You simply came home." I smiled at that. She was right. I hadn't fought for revenge or to prove a point. I fought to protect the only thing that still mattered: our name, our home, and our dignity. Grace came out carrying an old album she'd been working on. "For Mom," she said softly, setting it on my lap. The first page held a photo of Linda standing in the garden, laughing at something out of frame. Her hair glowed in the sunlight like spun gold. We flipped through the pages together: Grace's childhood, birthdays, Christmas mornings, the small moments that had built our lives. "She'd like this," I said. Grace smiled faintly. "I think she already does." For the first time in years, I heard laughter echo through the house again. Soft, genuine, unburdened. It filled the empty corners and made the walls feel less like stone and more like home. That night, when the moon rose high over the bay, I stepped outside again. The stars shimmered above the dark line of the trees, and the wind carried the faint smell of salt from the marshes. I imagined Linda standing near the fence, her hands tucked into the pockets of her dress, watching over us with that same calm smile she'd worn her whole life. "We're home again, sweetheart," I whispered. Inside, Grace was making coffee. The faint sound of the kettle whistling reached me through the open window. I turned off the porch light and stepped back inside. The kitchen was warm, the light soft and golden. Grace poured 2 cups and handed me one. "To new beginnings," she said. I raised the cup, nodding. "To new beginnings." We sat in silence, the only sound the ticking of the clock and the crickets outside. I realized then that peace doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, in a daughter's smile, in a repaired fence, in the quiet acceptance that pain is part of love's price. I looked around at the house, the place that had held our grief, our mistakes, our forgiveness, and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Contentment. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, just settles quietly in your bones. When Grace got up to wash the cups, I stayed at the table, tracing the grain of the old wood beneath my fingers. I thought of everything we had lost, and somehow of everything we had found again. "Let's start fresh," I said, almost to myself. The words hung in the air like a prayer. Outside, the night wrapped around the house in stillness. The stars burned steady above the magnolias, and for the first time in a long, long time, I believed that maybe, just maybe, we'd finally come home. Morning sunlight spilled gently through the kitchen window, washing the room in a warm gold hue. Outside, the air smelled of wet grass and honeysuckle after the night's light rain. I stood at the stove, the kettle whistling softly, as I poured hot water over the coffee grounds. The familiar sound grounded me, a reminder that peace, like forgiveness, often begins in the smallest rituals. I stepped onto the porch, coffee mug in hand, and watched the mist drift lazily over the fields. The Savannah morning stretched wide and endless before me. Green pastures glistening under the new light, songbirds calling from the magnolia trees. It was the kind of quiet that didn't ask for anything, only offered stillness in return. For the first time in a long time, I accepted it. Sitting in the old rocking chair, I let my mind wander through the years, the laughter, the heartbreak, the courtroom's echo, the long nights of doubt. I remembered Linda's funeral, how I'd promised to keep our home safe for Grace, and how close I'd come to losing both the house and the promise. Ryan's betrayal had burned deep, not because of the money or the property, but because it had made me question my worth as a father. For months, I'd wondered if love meant anything at all when it could be so easily manipulated. But time has a way of softening sharp edges. The truth settles differently once the storm passes. I realized justice isn't about revenge. It's a mirror that reveals who you are when the world crumbles around you. And what I saw in that mirror wasn't a broken man, but a stubborn one who refused to let bitterness rewrite his story. The screen door creaked open behind me. Grace stepped out, holding her own cup of coffee, her hair tucked messily behind her ears. She sat beside me, silent for a long time. The sunlight caught her face, and for a moment, she looked so much like Linda, it made my chest ache. "Beautiful morning," she said finally. "Yeah," I murmured. "Feels like the world's starting over again." She smiled faintly. "Maybe we are too." We sat there, saying nothing more, listening to the rustle of wind through the trees. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from pain anymore. It was peace, a quiet understanding that words could never capture everything, and sometimes they didn't need to. After she went inside, I stayed on the porch, lost in thought. I thought about the people who had wronged me and those I had wronged in return. I thought about how easily trust can be broken and how hard it is to build again. But most of all, I thought about choice, the simple, terrifying freedom we all carry. You can't control what people do to you, but you can always decide what kind of person you'll be after they do it. You can lose your money, your house, even your name, but never your decency. That's what Linda used to say. Later that afternoon, I was sorting through the desk drawers when I found an envelope tucked beneath an old stack of papers. My name was written on it in Linda's handwriting. Graceful, looping letters. It was dated the year before she died. On the front, she had written, "For when you're ready." My hands trembled as I opened it. "Tom," the letter began, "if you're reading this, you face something hard. I can't tell you what, but I know you. You'll want to fight, to fix, to prove. But remember this, the truth never needs to shout. It simply stands, steady and quiet, until the noise dies down. Then everyone sees it for what it is. And when that happens, I hope you remember, home isn't the walls or the land. It's the love you protect inside them." By the time I finished reading, my eyes were wet. I folded the letter gently and placed it back in the envelope. Linda's words didn't sting, they healed. That evening, Grace joined me in the garden. Together, we trimmed the rose bushes and watered the soil. The flowers Linda had planted years ago were blooming again, bright and full of color. Grace knelt beside me, her fingers brushing over the petals. "She'd love this," she whispered. "She does," I said. "She's still here, in every bit of this place." The sun began to set, casting long golden streaks over the grass. Grace stood and helped me up. As we walked back toward the porch, I looked at her and said, "Some endings are just beginnings in disguise." She smiled, the kind that carried both sadness and hope. "Then maybe this is ours." We stepped inside as the porch light flickered on, illuminating the familiar warmth of home. The house no longer felt haunted. It breathed again. The air was soft, forgiving. And as the night settled, I realized something simple but profound. Peace isn't given. It's built. One choice, one forgiveness, one dawn at a time. There comes a point in every storm when the thunder fades, and what remains is not the chaos that tore through us, but the stillness that follows. In that stillness, we learn who we truly are. This story, at its heart, isn't about revenge or the punishment of those who have done wrong. It's about the quiet, unglamorous strength it takes to stand firm when the world tilts against you. It's about dignity, the kind that refuses to disappear, even when love is betrayed, even when trust is shattered, even when the weight of silence feels unbearable. Life will always find ways to test our resolve. It sends us people who promise love, but bring ruin, circumstances that strip away everything we once believed safe. And yet, every trial offers a choice to become hardened by bitterness or refined by understanding. The measure of one's character isn't found in the victories shouted from rooftops, but in the moments we choose grace when anger would be easier. True justice rarely arrives with applause. It comes quietly, like dawn creeping over a scarred landscape, bringing warmth to the places we thought would never heal. There is an old truth, one easily forgotten in a world that glorifies vengeance, that peace does not mean winning. Peace means choosing not to lose yourself. It means looking into the mirror of your pain and deciding to keep your humanity intact, even when others have thrown theirs away. Forgiveness, too, is often misunderstood. It isn't surrender. It isn't pretending the wound never existed. It is a way of reclaiming power from what tried to destroy you. It's the act of saying, "You may have taken something from me, but you will not take the rest of my life." Time has a way of revealing what truly matters. Wealth fades, names are forgotten, reputations crumble, but integrity endures. It is the quiet foundation that remains when every false thing collapses. Those who live by deception often believe they are winning, but deceit always carries its own expiration date. Truth, even when buried under layers of manipulation, will rise. It does not shout or demand attention. It simply stands, unchanging, patient, inevitable. The deeper lesson lies in understanding that betrayal is not the end of the story. It is a doorway. Through it, we are forced to shed illusions, to see the world and ourselves with clearer eyes. In that painful clarity, we begin again. We plant new roots where the ground was once scorched, and somehow life grows stronger than before. That is the quiet miracle of endurance, how something once broken can still hold light. And so, the greatest victory is not found in courtrooms or confessions, nor in the downfall of those who wronged us. The greatest victory is found in the heart that refuses to close, the spirit that chooses to remain kind in a world that often rewards cruelty. It is found in the decision to rise each morning, to make coffee, to greet the sun, and to believe, despite everything, that goodness still matters. Because in the end, it does. Goodness is what rebuilds homes, mends hearts, and restores the pieces that life has scattered. It is the quiet architect of peace. When all the noise fades, when the years have passed and the anger has long turned to dust, what remains is the simple, steady truth that love, honest, patient, and unbroken, was always the real inheritance. And if we can learn to hold on to that, to choose truth over pride, compassion over vengeance, and forgiveness over despair, then even after the darkest storm, the dawn will find us standing, whole again. That is the legacy of endurance. That is the quiet triumph of truth. These turning points remind us that setting boundaries and valuing ourselves is not just an act of courage, it's the foundation of living with dignity. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one lesson from this story that you feel connected to? And how will you apply it in your own life? Let's grow together by sharing our thoughts. If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, feel free to leave a 0. Your feedback helps us improve. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that touch the heart and spark reflection. Thank you for watching, and here's to living life with strength, honesty, and authenticity.